Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Thursday, June 23rd. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 72 days, the game against Michigan in 156 days. We don't get to do very many breaking news editions of this podcast, but today is a bit of an exception. We do, however, get to do a lot of podcasts about an elite wide receiver committing to Ohio State. This is another one of those. Noah Rogers, a four-star prospect ranked as one of the 50 best players in the class, regardless of position, just committed to the Buckeyes on Wednesday afternoon. So we're going to drop this Morning Scoop episode a little earlier than normal. So if you're thinking, hey, it's not Thursday, it's even less Thursday than it normally is when we normally drop these episodes. But yes, no reason to make you wait. My guest today is Tony Gerdeman. We host the Buckeye Weekly podcast together. Tony, outside of the NCAA mandated scholarship cap of 85, is there anything that can stop Brian Hartline right now?
Ooh, well, man-made global warming. Unless you don't subscribe to that, then no, there's nothing, Tom. There's nothing that can stop Brian Hartline. It's been amazing to watch as he's just continued to do something that nobody, well, we say nobody else, like I say nobody else, but how much attention are we paying to other schools? Georgia has had some great success recruiting receivers, as has Alabama. But at some point you would think like, well, there's too many receivers now there. Like, I'm going to go somewhere else. Instead, it's like, have you seen how many receivers are there? I'm going to go there now. It's kind of similar to Pete Carroll back in the late 2000s with running backs, where he would get like 2 5-star running backs a year. And you're like, Mark Tyler, what are you doing? They already have this guy and this guy and this guy. And you're never going to run the ball. And at least at receiver, more than one plays. And as many as 6 can play at Ohio State, as we've seen. So it's impressive, and there's enough testimony basically that the idea that it is theory is no longer true. Like, they're putting guys into the NFL. They are making them productive as college players as well, and they throw the ball an awful lot. So it has everything you could possibly want as a receiver, as long as you have patience and have the right mindset and mental makeup to have that patience and to learn while being on the sideline.
Well, right now, just to sort of reset things for you, the Buckeyes hold commitments from the number 2 receiver in the class, Brandon Inniss, the number 3 receiver in the class, Carnell Tate, now the number 9 receiver in the class, Noah Rogers. Those 3 guys, yes, have committed on back-to-back-to-back days. Pretty good week of work for Brian Hartline and the Ohio State staff on the whole. They also have the number 32 receiver in the class, Bryson Rogers, and there seems to be more or less an industry-wide consensus that Bryson Rogers is about to rocket up those rankings as well after some impressive performances this spring. Tony, can you ever remember a positional recruiting class like this at Ohio State?
Well, yeah, no, yes, and no. Like, there have been certainly some good classes, some great classes. You can even look at 2020 with the receivers of Julian Fleming, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Mookie Cooper, and G. Scott. That was seen as a remarkable class, as 4 top 100 guys. We've seen what has happened since then. So, they still have some work to do to live up to that hype. But, in terms of like the numbers, you can look at the 2017 recruiting class with, at corner, you had Shaun Wade and Jeff Okudah. Jeff Okudah being the top corner, Shaun Wade being the number 2 corner. Also in that class was Kendall Sheffield, who was the number 1 junior college corner. Also in that class was Marcus Williamson, who has started sporadically at Ohio State, including last year. I believe Amir Reep was in that class as well. So that was a very bountiful class. 2016 defensive ends with Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bosa. An important class that it wasn't necessarily as deep in terms of numbers, but 2 5-star guys there. But 2008, the quote unquote Brew Crew with 3 5-star offensive linemen with Michael Brewster at center, Mike Adams at left tackle, and JB Shugarts at right tackle. They missed out on the 4 5-star kid from West Virginia on the interior there as well. They were hoping to get all 4 of those guys. Didn't happen, but that's one that kind of has lived in infamy. I mean, that was one that takes some credit for landing Terrell Pryor as well. After all, you get an offensive line like this, and that encourages a quarterback to come play with you. How far we have come from offensive linemen encouraging quarterbacks to come to Ohio State, and now we're at the point of receivers doing the same. Different styles of football. But yeah, those are some that stick out in my mind. The 2013 you mentioned before the show, Dontre Wilson and Ezekiel Elliott, where Dontre Wilson was more the star-ish as a freshman than Ezekiel Elliott in terms of like, it's the Percy Harvin role. It's Dontre Wilson. He's the H-back. Meanwhile, Ezekiel Elliott's just another running back. He'll eventually become something. Maybe he can be another Boom Herron. So yeah, those are some off the top of my head.
Yeah, wait till you see Ezekiel Elliott cover a kickoff at Purdue. He's really going to make his name on special teams, blowing some dude up at about the 12-yard line. We'll see what he does after that. Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes the guys who are the forgotten, the sort of forgotten man at the back half of the class are the ones who end up turning into the big stars. I remember I've told this story on one of these shows at some point, but covering the hotel arrival day in 2002 when the big hyped 2002 class came in, Maurice Claret and Justin Zwick and Mike D'Andrea and all those guys. And boy, all the TV cameras followed Justin Zwick coming in, and then some kid from Cleveland, like one of the last rated players in the class, an athlete, Troy something or other, he just kind of like walked past and no one cared because it was like, hey, there's Justin Zwick. And anyway, I don't remember how that story ended, so I don't know why I told it here. Anyway, we have talked a bunch this week about how they value positional flexibility and the ability for guys to play inside and outside at the wide receiver positions. So before we get into where specific guys might fit, it seemed like maybe we should just run through again the difference between the three receiver spots on the Ohio State's offense, because I have a feeling people don't necessarily always remember like which one is an X and which one's a Z and what's the difference again. So can you just kind of run through those three spots real quick?
Yeah, they play the X, the Z, and the H. The H is your slot receiver. That's what Jackson Smith and Jigba did last year. That's what Garrett Wilson did in 2020. They can really get the ball in advantageous situations, running over the middle of the field or just being matched up against safeties or linebackers or nickel corners. And so that's the slot. That's the H. You saw, as I said, with Jackson Smith and Jigba. Paris Campbell, he had over 90 catches in 2018. You saw Jackson Smith and Jigba have over 90 catches last year. The X is your split end, your Michael Thomas type, your bigger guy who, we say bigger guy, but that's becoming a stereotype, and that's becoming a used to was kind of denomination or a moniker for the X's. They are the guys that can, like I said, they'll move chains like a Michael Thomas, but as we've seen, as you've said, Brian Hartline wants guys to be able to rotate, but that's to get in your mind. That's the guy that you're talking about as an X. Carnell Tate, I think, fits in that boat. Z, you're talking about the speed guys. Your Devin Smith, deep route guy. Chris Olave played that. Not to confuse everybody, but the kind of position you would expect Jamison Williams to play, except he started at X back in 2020, which gives you an idea of why Brian Hartline wants guys to play all different positions. Tom, I remember you and I going back and forth, where is Garrett Wilson going to begin his career? And we talked, will it be in the slot or will it be at the Z? Turns out it was at the X with Benjamin Victor. And, why would he be at X? He's like 6 foot, 185 pounds, but he can also play much bigger than he is. And you're facing that, if a defense is playing man press, they're going to be right on you because that split end is right on the line. So you're going to have to deal with that. You've got to be able to get off of that, or at least out physical the corner. Whereas the flanker, the Z, he can move around some, as we've seen Chris Olave do, where he'll move in, he will come into motion and actually become a slot receiver himself, which is why, Brian Hartline doesn't get hung up on, well, Marvin Harrison can't play in the slot. He's an X. He's a bigger guy, and he's a good example of what Ohio State has at X right now. But we also saw in the Rose Bowl, Marvin Harrison rotates inside and catches a touchdown out of the slot. So there's a lot of different ways to use these guys, but if we're going to have to, you kind of pigeonhole them to start out with, but then you let them breathe and give them more roles as they go.
Yeah, Garrett Wilson was definitely did not fit the traditional profile of the X at Ohio State. That was always kind of the 6'5" guy, So, but then, think back to that Clemson Fiesta Bowl, just the early part, I'm not going to make you think back to the later part of that game, but the early part of that game, I think it was the opening drive, where Garrett Wilson goes about 7 feet in the air and just soars over the Clemson defensive back. It's like, well, yeah, you can be 6 foot tall and play X as long as you can jump out of the gym, and he could. So it was just fine. It was even better than having a 6'5" wide receiver. So yeah, and then of course later in his career, he played inside at one point and then went back outside. So none of these are final answers on any of this, but let's run through these guys and where we think they might slot in. Carnell Tate, Noah Rogers, Bryson Rogers, and Brandon Inniss. Here's a quick mnemonic for you, because Bryson Rogers spells his last name with a D. Noah Rogers spells his name not with a D, his last name. So here's how I'm choosing to remember this. You're welcome in advance. There is Noah D in Noah Rogers' last name. There you go. So Bryson Rogers, yes, Rodgers. Noah Rogers, Rogers. There you go. You can use that to spell names correctly for the next 3 years at least, maybe 4. We'll see how things go for those guys at Ohio State. But with those 4 guys, which of them do you see slotting in at each of those positions? With the understanding, of course, this is all subject to change because, as we said, these guys are going to end up moving around quite a bit, regardless once they actually show up on campus.
Yeah, thank you for that caveat, Tom. To me, that Carnell Tate being 6'2", I think he looked taller than 6'2". You saw him in person this week. He seems like a pretty big kid as a receiver. I see him as an X. Bryson Rogers, I really like the way he runs routes. I could see him inside, can see him outside a Z or an H. I think, to me, I like Noah Rogers. I've compared him to DeVere Posey. I like him outside as well, can be a Z or an X. Brandon Inniss, to me, Tom, I have already projected him outside at the Z. I know you have some differing opinions, but also he's essentially the same body type as Jackson Smith-Njigba, who you and I nailed immediately watching him, saying, no, that's an inside guy. He's going to be tremendous inside. And so I like that we maybe have a little difference here in where we see Brandon Inniss. And the good thing is we're both going to be right.
This is the best kind of question where it's like, eventually we're going to be right about everything. So yeah, this is Mark Givler on the show, yesterday's morning show. He thought probably inside, at least to start with, for Brandon Inniss. But again, all very much subject to change, because we're talking about, this is not the class where you've got a 6'5", Elijah Gardner and also a 5'9" Mookie Cooper, with a 6-inch height difference. These guys are all pretty much in that 6'0" to 6 flat to 6'2", 170 to 190 pounds, and the 170 guys are going to be putting on a little weight, so you're going to end up more or less in that same range. Very similar body types, all very athletic. So yeah, that's all those answers are subject to change. But I feel like we're kind of contractually obligated to have that conversation every time we talk about these guys, so there you go. We've done it. What's kind of an interesting part of this conversation, though, is, normally you think about a quarterback being the leader of the recruiting class and helping land skill talent around him. I mean, that's something that Dylan Raiola talked about earlier this week. He's in the class. He's already committed for 2024. Who are the guys you're actively recruiting and trying to bring in? And one of them was the running back Stacey Gage, who was at camp earlier this week, but he named a bunch of wide receivers as well. One of them was Noah Rogers. Dylan Raiola, pretty efficient if you ask me. The Buckeyes have 4 receivers, a running back, a tight end already committed for 2023, but no quarterback. So you've got Austin Novosad, who's a Baylor commit, who visited Ohio State 2 weekends ago, visited Baylor last weekend, is reportedly going to be making a final decision soon-ish on whether to stick with the Bears or flip to the Buckeyes. Brock Glenn just visited last weekend. He has all sorts of projections going to Auburn, but he's obviously visiting Ohio State, potentially interested in coming to Ohio State. But it just kind of feels like at this point, all the receiver talent might actually make that, the traditional equation there work backwards this time, where you've got so many great receivers, that might help them bring in their quarterback.
It's like the Justice League putting an ad in the paper for a leader, like insert, wanted leader. And, you've got all these crazy superheroes and you need somebody to get them the ball. But really, I think all of these quarterbacks know that whether Noah Rodgers is there or Carnell Tate is there or not, there's going to be plenty of talented receivers to throw to. But the question is, will you ever get the opportunity to throw to them? And so that's really, I think, where that's the decision. That's the part that you have to decide. You're going to get a shot, but am I good enough? And am I patient enough? And you're seeing, I mentioned that with the receivers. These receivers have to be patient. You don't come in and star as a freshman receiver at Ohio State. It just doesn't happen. Now you can come in and build and eventually get into the rotation as a freshman, but that's about all you should be really hoping for, expecting. Quarterback, you're looking at Kyle McCord in year 2 now, understands that his first year really attempting to start is going to be year 3. Now, I think you're talking about quarterbacks that Ohio State is in on right now that have that already in their mind as likelihoods anyway. So maybe that helps, because they're not, I don't know that they're at this point right now recruiting guys that are 3 and done, because those guys have already, they're not necessarily going to come to Ohio State after Kyle McCord and Devin Brown and in between Dylan Raiola. So you're fishing in a different pond, but now the pond that you're fishing in, these fish expect to be around for a while, and so maybe they have some more patience.
It's a very different kind of part of the a very different part of the rankings than you typically think of Ohio State's quarterbacks being pulled from. And it's, Austin Novosad is a 4-star recruit. This is not you're not pulling someone and stealing someone away from some D3 school. This is a very good quarterback, but it'll be potentially the first time in how many years? You had CJ Stroud. If you want to include Justin Fields, if you want to include Tate Martell before that, they've had 5-star quarterbacks on those recruiting classes pretty much every year since 2018 was the year they brought in Matthew Baldwin. I think this will be the first year they don't have a 5-star quarterback recruit since maybe then. But yeah, it's a little bit of a different part of the conversation. But yeah, that whole quarterback position is so interesting, because you don't know mindsets coming in terms of, are they coming in with the intent of staying for 4 years? Are they with the transfer portal, are people going to be a little bit more patient? We've talked about, should they be also trying to bring in a 3-star Ohio player every once in a while, with the understanding, just have an extra body in that quarterback room and a break glass in case of emergency guy who's not necessarily expecting to start, the Chris Chugginoff type or the Gunnar Hoke type. Do you bring one of those guys in recruiting instead of in the transfer portal? They have not done that yet, but it's just another one of those things to kind of monitor in the future of quarterback recruiting at Ohio State. But based on the recent track record, I don't think wide receiver recruiting or quarterback recruiting is a real big concern for any of Ohio State's fans right now. Coaching staff probably feeling pretty good about both of those as well. So that'll do it for today's show. We will have Tony and I will have a new episode of the Buckeye Weekly podcast, which will probably drop a little bit after this one does. You can check that out. You can find the Buckeye Weekly podcast. We're going to be answering your listener questions. You can find that. You can find all of our other great shows. Gives in the Bank, Mark Givler and Bill the Bank Green have been just as busy as we have, talking about recruiting commitments this week. You can find their show. Kevin Newton does the Big Me Kickoff. Alex Kleitman does Around the Oval. You can find them all wherever you find this. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of them. You can subscribe right there and also leave us a 5-star rating and review, which will help other folks find those shows as well. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.